Hey friends, raise your hand if you've been to therapy. I really should. Today's story takes us down a bit of a rabbit hole into the idea of legitimate therapy and how it can sometimes badly influence you, while also inadvertently exposing a slight pedophilia ring in the therapy industry? What? Well, let's get started. Am I the a-hole for firing our family therapist after she thought my son was a gangbanger? No, not in that sense. I have an 11-year-old son who had a traumatic event happen a couple of years ago. He didn't show any signs of being messed up. Actually, he was his normal self. With his starting middle school, my ex and I decided to do family therapy with him. To be honest, it was more about his mum, but whatever. After 6 months of therapy, a therapist told us that she was concerned over something my son said. A million things ran through our heads. She tells us that he's joined a street gang. She said it was hard to believe, but the gang had a name and everything. Now, first off, our son is 11 and still plays with action figures. He's barely 4.5 feet. We thought it was a joke. She said the name was And. I sort of lost it and said And, A-N-D, stands for Andrew, Nick, and Dashiell. That's him and his best friends. They use that name when they do co-op gaming. I told her that if this is what she got out of months of therapy, our son is a gangster, then we're not wasting our time. I told my ex she is free to do it all she wants. Now the therapist is backtracking and insisting that it's not what she meant and we were making good work together. My ex agreed. Now a bunch of edits. She's not young either. The therapist is in her 50s. Another thing I overlooked was that my son was never going to open up with a female the way he'd open up with a male. I feel bad about that, but next time I'll be more selective if he needs therapy. Now, this is actually something I was talking about with a friend of mine, more relatably in the current situation with Ukraine and in comparison to how Europe's open arm policy in terms of accepting the refugees of Ukraine versus people who were from the Middle East and fleeing. It became agreed upon that underlying all of us is some generality of xenophobia. We prefer people we most relate to, both just visually and culturally. And that can apply to many aspects of ourselves too, our gender, our profession, our standing in society. Does that mean these things are okay? Absolutely not. But the fact we're aware of them is progress. It's when we act upon those things and rely on them to make judgment, that's when we become the racist or sexist, etc. In this case too specifically, this is just a little boy. Especially when this reason for therapy seems to be more related to the mum, according to the dad. It does make sense that maybe he would be more open about stuff to a fellow man. So I wouldn't say this is some case of, encouraging misogyny among the youth. There's going to be times in this boy's life where he realizes he can talk to women just as openly as to men. But in his particular case right now, I don't think he needs to be pushed into that. Edit to add, and the therapist is an MFT, that's a marriage and family therapist. We did not do therapy afterwards because he had to do invasive interviews with police detectives and forensic psychologists. It was never ending. The person just ended up pleading guilty, and that person was a female. Top comment does go into what I was sort of perceiving at first. Usually I'm ready to mouth off at a parent who wants to override the trained therapist, but clearly this therapist person is an idiot. Natar, I wouldn't put my kid in the hands of an idiot. I agree, Natar, though it's worth noting that 11 isn't too young to be in a gang. Poor kids who need surrogate families or who have relatives involved in crime don't really have a lower age limit. And apparently he has been in a turf war. He was once in the playground over the swings when he was 5. Total bloodshed. 7 dead. Now to enjoy a lesser supported opinion. Yatta. Clearly she did not have all the information there. It happens. A lot of being a therapist is reading between the lines, without pushing, lest the therapist guide their patient and do more damage than help. Example, see all the cases where children were guided into truly believing they were abused when they were not. Both she and your wife agree progress is being made. Don't undo all that work and investment, both time and money, with a tantrum. Now here's where it gets interesting. Though the 125 down votes, they have a point. Therapists shouldn't necessarily guide, they should just observe and listen. To guide is to assume that you are putting them on the right path when you might not be. There's a reason therapy isn't just some sort of course you can do online. You've got to meet someone and actually talk to them. But this statement here is where I think it gets sketchy. See all the cases where children were guided into truly believing they were intimately abused when they were not. Now I have heard of this. For those of you who haven't, here's an article that does talk about one circumstance of this. Bit of a read, but we'll try and skim through it. In March 1988, residents of the small town of Stewart, Florida, were gripped by what can only be described as mass hysteria law enforcement officers had discovered a secret satanic cult being run out of the local Montessori preschool. There were tales of dark hooded figures, bizarre blood ceremonies, and ritualistic children. Just another day in Florida. No. Evidence for the secret cult of child mollies came from none other than the children themselves. A decade later, many of these remembered acts were so hideous, so barbaric, that the victims had buried the memories deep within their psyche, uncovering them only under intensive hypnosis. After hours of these sessions, psychologists and law enforcement officers were able to retrieve long-buried memories of bizarre ceremonies, torture, and the worst intimate violations imaginable. Psychologists flooded into the town to uncover more debauchery and interview and save these innocent children. So it was basically a psychologist wanting to publish her fancy book's wet dream. Head on down to this place full of troubled, repressed people. Ooh, baby! The more psychologists and law enforcement dug down, the more instances of ritual abuse they turned up. Pretty soon, they had collected more than 60 testimonies of horrendous torture and intimate deviance. The community went ballistic. Some residents attended town meetings armed with handguns, hunting for Satanists, while others planted listening devices in classrooms and searched for mass graves on the school grounds. It was like Salem all over again, one parent recalled. As a result of the children's testimony, police arrested James Toward, the owner of the preschool, and his office manager. Then they investigated Toward's wife, who also worked at the school. The case against her was weaker than the case against her husband, so the lawyers and psychologists reached out to a new round of kids to find details that might implicate her. Among them was Carol Macmillan's daughter, an anxious little blonde girl named Kristen Grace Erickson. Erickson was 12 years old at the time she was hypnotized. She understood from the doctors and other adults in town that her preschool teacher and his colleagues had done some terrible things, and could do more if people didn't do something to help. She trusted the doctors who brought her into an interview room, put her under hypnosis, and began asking questions. So like a cancel culturing manhunt of the 21st century, they've caught the instigator of these satanic things. And let's note that this young teenage girl, tween, has been pulled into the middle of it all to do her part, pre-context that these are terrible people. Like, that's been established in her brain. So how do you think that's going to affect her ability to recall memories? You can't make people do something against their will while under hypnosis, but a subject can become highly suggestible. Erickson recalls that a psychologist started asking probing questions about her experience at the preschool when she was a toddler. Initially, she had pleasant memories of the place, with its caring staff and occasional campfire sleepover. But after a few sessions, she began remembering bizarre rituals and being placed on a table where she was probed by cult members. I said that I saw a snake get killed and sliced down the side, and that we had to drink its blood, and that there were people in hoods around a fire, she says. Oh no, it's almost as if you tell someone to think about a red elephant, they'll think about a red elephant. Now here's the part where if you think the psychologist is not the a-hole, is just doing their job, think again. The psychologist seemed pleased and pushed for more details, especially about Toward's wife. After the session was over, Erickson felt odd. She knew that by telling these people what had happened, she was protecting other children who might be in danger. But she wasn't sure that what she had said was completely true. The memory felt funny, like a lie. So she timidly suggested to the psychologist that she might have made the whole thing up. No, she remembered him saying. That's just what it feels like. It really happened. This dude literally pushed her into making someone guilty of something that never happened just to forward his own career. For the next 15 years, she'd be just dealing with this confusion in her mind. And that's this psychologist's fault. This couple would be in jail all this time because of her. She'd been mentally scammed into thinking that she was doing something good and protecting other children. No, she'd been manipulated by this man. For the next 15 years or so, Erickson lived with the knowledge that she had been molested by a satanic cult masquerading as a Montessori preschool. Then, while living in San Francisco in her 20s, she decided to experiment with a sensory deprivation tank, a chamber half filled with tepid water and impervious to sound or light. Oh yeah, public announcement, don't ever use those. The salt water tank things, the floating pools and stuff, I mean, unless they show you or like tell you or you can see there is a system for it, they don't clean the water. Like, you are literally just floating around in other people's dead skin and, you know, most likely farts. Let's be honest, people fart in the pool. Hell, if they had some water beforehand, ooh. Crawl into one and you feel as if you are floating silently in the blackest space. For decades, people have used this extreme sort of quiet blackness as a sort of forced meditation. Freedom to fart in a pool, more like it. At first, she felt nothing but silence and boredom. But in the last few minutes, Erickson had an epiphany. She realized that something from her childhood hypnosis therapy was haunting her, and that she needed to come to terms with it. Soon afterward, she looked up Alan Tesson, one of the psychologists involved in the case, and was shocked to learn that 10 years after the investigations, he had been sued for implanting false memories in one of his patients. Frickin' A! What did I tell you? So, the heavily downvoted person on Reddit, this sad fellow is actually on the right track. They've got a point. Psychologists do, in fact, have the ability, and have done in the past, plant memories. It's actually regarded as false memory syndrome. And now your immediate thought might be, oh my gosh, Jack, can you just read another story already? Shut up, no, this is really interesting. How can you have a syndrome for something that was more so just someone manipulating you into doing something? Like, this isn't like Stockholm Syndrome. This is someone's sociopathic tendencies. Who's gonna speak up for these people who have been wrongly accused of, abusing children? Well, that's where the False Memory Syndrome Foundation comes in. What nice people, looking out for those who are wrongly accused. Let's meet them, shall we? So for some quick backstory, the FMSF was created by Pamela and Peter Freyd. Peter here in all his handsome hunky glory. Essentially, it all started when their adult daughter, Jennifer Freyd, this lovely person right here, accused the father, Mr. Peter, of abusing her as a child. Now, what does any self-respecting parent of their child do? Especially when, they find out that their husband's been abusing their daughter. They accuse her of lying this entire time. In fact, she's created false memories. So Peter and Pamela, along with Ralph Underwager, remember that name, we'll get back to him, joined and accused parents and then spent considerable energy assembling a broader academic, essentially claiming that clients in therapy were making up stories of abuse. They claimed with increasing vigor that their now adult children were victims of therapists who encouraged the recovery of false memories. So essentially, Jennifer was going to therapy and the therapist planted the idea that she was abused when she was a kid. Now again, okay, well, we have evidence in history with psychologists and people planting memories, so it's very possible that they're on the right track here. So they establish this foundation. Who do they put on the board? Well, it starts pretty well, but then it just like the ruble, it just crashes. We begin with Aaron T. Beck, widely regarded as the founder of modern cognitive therapy. This handsome gentleman right there. Hello, sir. Looking very old. Love the bow tie. Then we move on to, getting a bit shaky here, Elizabeth Loftus, whose false memory research has been regarded by memory researchers as influential, but increasingly controversial, with original claims being regarded as overstated. And hey, look, American psychologists, they've got the establishment of people who know about this stuff to a degree. And of course, we can't forget Mr. James Randi. Now what is James Randi very qualified in? Oh, he's a magician. Huh? For someone who extensively challenged paranormal and pseudoscientific claims, it seems kind of weird he's on a board that is pseudoscience. However, now remember Ralph Underwager, one of the founding members alongside the Freyd parents? Let's dive into him. He's an American minister and psychologist, very professional therapist in his field. Apparently, he was someone who was always there to defend the abusers. It seemed to be like his life mission. Apparently, he had given evidence for the defense in over 200 abuses in USA, Canada, Great Britain, New Zealand, and Australia. His life was traveling around the world to say, nah, he didn't touch her. Nah, she's a kid. He wouldn't do that, not him. Which, okay, court of law, you can have your defense, sure. But he was someone already well known for his views against child protection laws. He was one of the founders of VOCAL, which stood for Victims of Child Abuse Laws, a support group for people who claim to be falsely accused. He had already famously stated in the media and in court that 60% of women intimately abused in childhood reported that the experience was good for them. Oh, wowie. I mean, you accuse psychologists and therapists of implanting thoughts into victims. I'm pretty sure you're doing it even worse. Now, okay, it might just be a political thing, you know. Maybe he just hates women. But what does he do in 1993, folks? Well, him and his wife, yeah, he has a wife, who's also a board member of the foundation, False Memory Syndrome Foundation. They gave an interview to the Dutch pro-pedophilia magazine, Pedica, the Journal of Pedophilia. You know what they said? I mean, the whole interview itself is honestly pretty interesting to read up on. Some little bits I've noticed here and there is they talk about how sexuality is actually a choice, which is interesting, until they seem to be only highlighting the fact that it's about, you know, well, maybe people who are gay don't actually want to be gay. They're just sticking to being gay because they think they're meant to be, when really they're meant to be straight. So really, if you're a lesbian, you should sleep with me because maybe my pee-pee's really good for you. You just need to give it a chance. But okay, what did he say? Pedophiles can boldly and courageously affirm what they choose. They can say that what they want is to find the best way to love. I am also a theologian, and as a theologian, I believe it is God's will that there be closeness and intimacy, unity of the flesh between people. A pedophile can say, this closeness is possible for me within the choices that I've made. So there you have it. If God made you want to sleep with kids, then you should be allowed to sleep with children. Doesn't matter that they're not able to comprehend what you're trying to want from them. If you get horny when you see a kid naked, that's just what you're meant to do. When you see someone in public and you think that's hot, you have every right by God's will to go and harass them because you're attracted to them. So you deserve them, folks. That's... God damn it. As a result of that interview, Underweger was forced to resign from the FMSF board, but Wakefield remained as a board member. Just like any other politician, they've retired from the area while still being extremely connected to the area. Again, public reminder, these are the people who have made it their life goal to ensure that people who abuse children are always innocent, and that anyone who's experienced abuse as a child, 60% of them have enjoyed it, and really, it's not traumatic. They're just being told it's traumatic. Betrayal trauma? Nah, what are you talking about? Type of trauma when you experience something from a loved one, an intimate one, that you kind of shut down because you're afraid of losing them if you experience that and confront them about it? No, no. But okay, just quick. You want to know what the mum did to Jennifer, again, daughter, who accused husband of being an abuser? One graphic example is outlined in the book Blind to Betrayal. Give it a read. Support Freyd and her work. Jennifer here, not the mother, Jennifer Freyd. The book details how Pamela Freyd wrote a thinly veiled, anonymous account of her daughter's alleged false accusations, changing enough detail to cast aspiration on her daughter's character, but not enough to make the account truly anonymous. She then posted the article with a letter from herself on the FMSF letterhead to Professor Freyd's professional colleagues, identifying Freyd and attempting to undermine her, just at the time she was being assessed for promotion. So while Jennifer is trying to proceed in her career, her own mother is trying to undermine her and accuse her of being trying to... What? Accuse her dad of being an abuser. What did she get from that? She wasn't suing. She privately, that's the thing to mention, she privately approached her father about it. This wasn't a case of, sharing it to the world, #cancel him. This was a private engagement with her father that we need to confront this. That happened. Here's the thing that really just destroyed them, though. So this thing was dismantled in 2019. No one seemed to stop and wonder why. If it was so possible to create false memories, therapists were not running around creating memories of happy childhoods. Wouldn't we want to bask in our success as clients ran off happy and cured? That's literally the purpose of your profession, to make people feel better. And they try to spread like a Mormon church. An Australian society was formed in 1993. The person leading it, though, Dr. Jerome Gelb. He was exposed for egregious plagiarism and subsequently arrested for taking a loaded gun into a Melbourne magistrate court. In case you don't know, in Australia, guns are practically illegal unless you're on a bloody farm. But also, that's not it. He was twice suspended from practice as a psychiatrist, once for having it on with a patient, and then for firearms offenses. Wow. They're really picking the top of the pack here. And who was the founder of the one in Britain? British False Memory Society? Oh, none other than Roger Scottford, someone who was also accused of being a child abuser. But the worst thing here is that, for all we know, this Roger guy, maybe he was genuinely falsely accused. But we're not going to be able to fully realize that, not with all these people behind him. Now, thankfully, with the crumbling of this foundation in 2019, it has helped bring to light the legitimacy of these false memory syndrome things. Reading from the British Psychological Society here. In 1993, same year that the False Memory Foundation was formed, the British Psychological Society convened a working party in response to the concern that some psychologists might be inadvertently implanting false memories of child sexual abuse in their clients. 2006, an article was published with subsequent endorsement to the idea that this is a legitimate thing, all the way leading up to a child sexual abuse inquiry by the UK government in 2015. As a result, it caused there to be a widespread agreement on the existence of these false memories being legitimate in the psychological community. Unfortunately, all the stuff that's being endorsed is based on people who are part of this sort of foundation. So it is a still running issue and debate among the community whether or not false memory syndrome is actually legit. During their research in regards to trying to recreate false memories experiences in a lab, only 8 of the 22 memory implantation studies reviewed assessed whether a false recollective experience was accepted as real, and on average, about 15% of participants appear to fully accept a false memory. But it might be lower than that. Studies by researchers such as Henry, this person, suggested that self-report ratings of accepting a memory as real or more conservative than the observer ratings of false memories that the studies report. So, it is possible that the actual figure may be lower than this. So basically, these people the 15% who are saying that they are genuinely believing the false memories, might be influenced by the observer to say that they're experiencing them rather than genuinely experiencing them. Similar to when your friend cooks something for you and it tastes disgusting, but you say it tastes great because you want to support them. Here's another interesting little tidbit. Finally, we note that while researchers have been able to implant single false childhood memories, we are not aware of them implanting memories for repeated events, which often feature in abuse allegations. Again, a lot of blah blah blah, but basically the end of the story is essentially the idea of creating false memories, not really legitimate when it comes to childhood abuse. Maybe you can have someone falsely memorize seeing a hot air balloon on a bus trip to school one time, but being assaulted and penetrated by a parent or a sibling or someone, that's not a random hot air balloon. That's not just a little, look at that thing. That's a traumatic experience. So to conclude, this downvoted comment should be downvoted. That was a long ramble. I think this whole story alone is just one video. I might leave it there. As always, gang, I gotta thank you so much for watching these videos. I can go on tangents sometimes, so I appreciate you sticking around. It's fun. They're interesting. It's fun to dive down the rabbit hole sometimes. If you could support the channel as always, leaving a like, subscribing if you're not yet. But otherwise, we'll end things there. Thank you as always for watching. My name's been Jack. You've been watching Mick, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.